Did you know that there is a way to measure just how polluted our air is? It's called parts per million, or ppm. It measures carbon dioxide molecules to other molecules in the atmosphere. For several eons, our ppm was at 275, but after the 18th century, it began to increase to 350 ppm, their bare minimum for safe breathing. Now we're at 400 ppm, with a 2 ppm increase annually. As a result, our climate has changed drastically. Despite the overwhelming evidence, there are still many who deny climate change. I won't name names. And it's this denial that adds to climate change and pollution. This is why 350.org was founded in 2008 by Bill McKibben, a Vermont journalist who published one of the first books on climate change, The End of Nature, in 1989. The goal of 350 is simple: bring awareness to climate change through peaceful protests, art, and activism. Now 350 has several branches in countries all across the world. 350 Vermont was one of the first 350 branches, beginning in October 2010 Global Work Party.
There you go. Look at that. Haha! Is a banner that can be used by people who are out on kayaks on the water. So these letters will get mounted on the deer fence that's over in the other part of the room, and then mounted on poles. Right, Arthur?
I heard about them I was a part of an environmental group. I went to school at St. Michael's.
I heard about it because, I went to school in Boston around the time of Occupy Boston, and I was just learning a lot about the, climate change and activism, and it was becoming really prominent in my life. So it just came across my radar through my school's environmental club and all that stuff. So when I moved to Burlington, I looked up a way to get involved, and sure enough, there was a local 350 group.
I think it's important for everyone. For me personally, I love being outside, so I kind of have that connection to nature, and I definitely don't want to lose that.
Well, it's important to me because I always had access to nature. Growing up, I grew up in a small town, and playing in the woods was the thing to do. Going for hikes was always a lot of fun. I just have a real appreciation for how just profoundly beautiful nature is here in Vermont. What made me move to Vermont were just the mountains and the majesty of the mountains, and how amazing they look in the distance when they're all like gray on an overcast day. I care about the environment because it just is right. It's not greedy or hateful, really, and I think we can learn a lot from it, and we have a lot to be grateful for, just walking around outside in the sunlight. I don't know, it's just beautiful, and it makes me happy, and I definitely feel a deep connection to it.
My summer I actually spent doing a storytelling campaign. I went around to the Northeast Kingdom and just interviewed different people, kind of figuring out what they like about nature.
And what's nice about 350 is that we all have equal say and kind of equal titles, if you will. We're all volunteers, but as a facilitator, I just kind of take the notes, I recap what went on, I kind of guide the conversation if need be. So that is what I do. I also help out by tabling at events and just being part of it.
Nodes for 350 Vermont, just ways to organize locally. So the Burlington node was one of the first ones. We meet pretty regularly now, every other week.
With the treasurer of Vermont and then the Vermont Pension Fund to just divest the pension funds that are invested in fossil fuel resources, in Exxon, and whatnot, and just invest it in sustainable resources so that our money isn't tied in with fossil fuels. And it's a way to make a statement. It's obviously not going to bankrupt fossil fuel companies.
So sometimes people see that, oh, it's cold out today. There's no climate change. No, that's weather.
Campaigns are involved in trips to the White House, getting arrested at the White House. Actually, I think 350 Vermont started right after the protests at the White House when 1,200 people.
Demonstration last year when McKibben and others were arrested after chaining themselves to the White House fence to protest the Keystone XL pipeline.
We need people like Barack Obama to start standing up finally.
He ended up finally, after being under a lot of pressure, he turned it down. So whether you realize it or not, we're all part of the web of life, and we're all being affected. And the climate deniers are either benefiting in some financial way from fossil fuel, or they're just total denial and believing the media that does not want to face up to the reality of climate change. You don't have to look very far to see the impact from the increasing storms, droughts. There's a little. The conflict in Syria started really when, due to a drought in Syria, farmers moved off their land because they could no longer support themselves and were looking for some kind of support from the government, and were coming to cities, and there was tremendous pressure due to the fact that they had a long-standing drought, and the farmers couldn't make it on the land. So as thousands of farmers were coming into the cities and needing support, instead of helping them, the government cracked down, and they fought back, and there's certainly other components to it. That was a significant part. And Naomi Klein said in her book, they know that this changes everything, and that's why they're not going to face it. The fossil fuel companies are going to get every drop of oil they can, and the status quo and politicians who are lobbied very heavily by the fossil fuel companies have every reason to deny it, because they can't continue in this way, and so they know if they face up to it, then their way of life and their way of making a profit, the whole world is at risk. We can't avoid it. I mean, it wasn't. Let's see, it was 2011, I believe, when Hurricane Irene hit, and that was it was a very severe storm that had a devastating impact on Vermont. And the flooding was severe. There are many places still recovering from that, and bridges that had stood 200 years were washed away. So, like I said, you don't have to look too far to see the impacts of climate change. One thing in particular that I'm most proud of that 350 Vermont has done or is doing, we do a number of different things, and from working in the legislature to trying to enact bills and policy that will move us in the direction of getting off fossil fuel, to educating people, to activism. We're all committed to civil disobedience, and so we really run the gamut. We also work with a number of organizations, so we're kind of a bridge between. We work with Rising Tide and VPIRG and, well, the Worker Center, Vermont Worker Center, a convention coming up called the People's Convention, at which a number of organizations are coming together, including 350 Vermont, to look at, you know, the kind of world that we want to build and how to do that. So I think we're way past the point of just changing, you know, your light bulbs and you know, using less water. That's not going to do it, you know, and that helps. I think everyone needs to pay attention to their own footprint, but we really need to do much more, and there are all kinds of opportunities. You know, you don't have to look very far. There are many different ways, locally, statewide, nationally, and internationally, to get involved.
Around the clock, little attention has been paid to the possible connection between the storm and climate change. Scientists have long warned how global warming would make North Atlantic hurricanes more powerful. Just 2 weeks ago, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences published a major study on the connection between warmer sea surface temperatures and increase in stronger Atlantic hurricanes. The report said, quote, "In particular, we estimate that Katrina magnitude events have been twice as frequent in warm years compared with cold years."
Point is that we really finally need to have this reckoning. Either the fossil fuel industry keeps pouring carbon into the atmosphere and we keep seeing this kind of event. A piece in Rolling Stone this summer that went kind of viral, explaining that the fossil fuel industry already has 5 times more carbon in its inventory than even the most conservative government thinks would be safe to burn.
Not something that people's kids will have to deal with or grandkids. It's a crisis breaking over our heads at this moment. Planet. The price of corn and wheat immediately shot up, and there began to be the outbreaks of small-scale food riots in parts of the world where people were having trouble getting dinner. I think there's no question but that there will be expense and economic difficulty in dealing with the problem that we face. We've got to take the most important part of our economy and very swiftly, more swiftly than is economically or politically convenient, transfer it off fossil fuel and onto renewable energy. That can't be done without a certain amount of disruption.
know that really, when it comes down to it, nothing can be done to solve this problem. And if they said we're going to get in there and solve this problem, people would be scared, silly, and they would say, well, come on, solve it, and they don't want that pressure.
The bigger problem is that we do know how to solve some of it, but there are people who just as soon not. And those people, as you said, are the oil and the gas and the coal industry. The thing to realize about all this, the really scary thing, is not what's happened so far, though if you've been in its path, that's plenty scary enough. What's scary is to realize that that all happened by raising the temperature of the planet 1 degree. The scientists who study this are in pretty clear consensus that we have another degree in the pipeline already from carbon that we've already emitted. That heat is held in the oceans for a little while. There's a kind of thermal lag. More to the point, they're convinced, and there's a robust consensus about this among climatologists, they are convinced that unless we make the switch off fossil fuel, off coal and oil and gas with great speed, that we will see a temperature rise of 5 or 6 degrees in the course of this century. If 1 degree melts the Arctic, we better not find out what 4 degrees does. Short supply. The per capita amount of grain grown on this planet has been shrinking for the last 15 years or so. We don't have much margin, and we can't afford this kind of severe disruption that we're looking at now. Nor can we afford for our coastlines. America has an enormously long coastline to be constantly battered by larger storms that come with higher sea levels to begin with and make them scarier. There are now plenty of scenarios about what it will take to put our biggest port cities, New York, Los Angeles, very much in harm's way as sea level rises. Early stage.
And when it heats up like this, is that in fact an indication of climate change?
Absolutely. So far this year, the federal government just reported that we've seen the warmest 6 months, the warmest year, and the warmest decade on record. 19 nations set new all-time temperature records this summer. We talked with our colleagues in Pakistan in May. We were on the phone with them one day, and they said, people in Pakistan don't normally complain about the heat, it's often hot there. But they said, today's hot. How hot? Well, we just set the new all-time Asia temperature record, 129 degrees.
I'm not a big believer in man-made climate
Trump
change.
has now signed orders saying construction can resume.
Almost a 30% decrease in the EPA. Trump administration orders a media blackout.
We tell them no more.
This is the greatest uniting of nations, of movements, and of peoples that we've seen in this country in a very long time.
You stand with those who are at the front.
Our oceans are not for sale to the highest oil and gas bidders.
It's about public health.
small part of that, to be able to crisscross the world and see just how many people really are laying it on the line to try and protect the one world that we know about.